Pack your things and leave. Tonight. That's what my son said to me. Not quietly, not with any hesitation. He said it the way you'd tell a stranger who wandered onto your property. And his wife. She was standing right behind him in the hallway, arms crossed, not saying a word. She didn't need to. The smirk on her face said everything. I was 63 years old. I had just buried my wife of 38 years 4 months earlier. And my son was telling me to pack my things. I didn't yell back. I didn't cry. I looked at him for a long moment. This man I had coached through Little League, taught to drive, paid 4 years of college tuition for. And I said, all right. That was it. Just, all right. I turned around, walked back to my room, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while. I could hear them talking in hushed voices down the hall. Probably relieved it had gone so smoothly. Probably already making plans for what to do with my room. I want to tell you how I got there. Because it didn't start that night. It started much earlier, and I ignored every sign, the way fathers sometimes do when they don't want to believe what they're seeing. My wife Evelyn passed in March. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 9 weeks. 9 weeks is not enough time to say everything you need to say to a person you've spent your entire adult life with. I'm not going to talk about that too much here because some things aren't meant to be shared with the world, but I will say that when she was gone, the house, our house, the one we'd owned outright for over a decade, felt like it had lost its air. I couldn't sleep in our bedroom. I'd walk into the kitchen in the morning and forget why I came in. I was 70% functional on a good day. My son Kevin called me 2 weeks after the funeral. He said he and his wife, Diane, had been talking, and they thought it made sense for me to come stay with them for a while. They had a 4-bedroom house in a suburb about 40 minutes from where I'd been living. One of the rooms was being used as a home office. But Kevin said Diane wouldn't mind moving her things. I should have thought harder about it. I know that now. But grief does something to your judgment. It makes you reach for whatever feels like warmth, even if the warmth is borrowed. I sold some furniture, put the house on a rental arrangement. I wasn't ready to sell it, not yet, and I moved in with my son and his wife in early May. The first few weeks were fine. Kevin and I had dinner together most nights. I played with my granddaughter, Lily. She was 7 at the time, sharp as a tack, would climb up next to me on the couch and demand I read to her. That part was genuinely good. That part I don't regret. But Diane, and I want to be fair here, because I've had a lot of time to think about this, Diane had a different idea of what this arrangement meant. I'm not sure she ever saw me as her father-in-law moving in during a hard time. I think she saw a complication moving into her house. Small things first. She'd rearrange the kitchen and not mention it, so I'd open 3 wrong cabinets looking for a glass. She'd make dinner for her and Kevin and Lily, and then mention, almost as an afterthought, that she hadn't made enough for me. Not mean about it. Just absent, like it hadn't occurred to her that I lived there too. I started contributing to groceries. Then I started buying groceries entirely. Then I started paying the utilities, because it seemed fair. Kevin and I never had a formal conversation about it, but somewhere around month 2, I was putting $3,000 a month into their household. Kevin's salary covered the mortgage. Mine covered everything else. I'm not saying that to sound like a martyr. I have money. I made good decisions over 40 years. Investments, a small business I sold in 2019, Evelyn's life insurance, the rental income from our old house. I have more money than I'll spend in the time I have left. Paying for groceries was not a hardship. But here's the thing. I know now that Diane knew exactly how much money I had. I don't know when she found out, whether Kevin told her or she saw something she shouldn't have, or whether she simply did the math. But around month 3, the energy in that house shifted. Diane started being nicer to me, asking about my investments, mentioning casually that they'd been thinking about renovating the kitchen, asking my opinion on things she'd never asked my opinion on before. I noticed it. But again, I told myself I was being uncharitable. She's trying harder. That's a good thing. It wasn't a good thing. It was a different thing entirely. Kevin came to me one evening in September. He sat down at the kitchen table with that look he's had since he was a teenager, the one where he's rehearsed what he wants to say and is hoping I'll agree quickly, so he doesn't have to say the rest of it. He told me they were thinking about adding a second floor to the house, more space for everyone. The proper suite for me, he said. Real privacy. I'd have my own entrance, my own bathroom, the works. And, he said, here's the part I should have walked away from. He said he was hoping I could help with the cost. I asked how much. He said $80,000. I looked at him for a moment. Then I asked if he and Diane had talked to a contractor already. He said they'd gotten a quote. I asked to see it. He said he'd left it at work. I told him I'd think about it. I thought about it for 3 days, and then I gave him $40,000, because I am his father, and I wanted to believe he meant it when he said it was for me too. I told him the other half needed to come from them. He nodded. He said, of course. The construction never started. When I asked about it in November, Kevin said they were reassessing. When I asked again in January, Diane told me, pleasantly, that they decided to use the money for some other home improvements. New floors in the living room. A new fence. A patio. I stood in that kitchen and I watched my $40,000 turn into a patio. I want to be honest about something. At this point, I was angry, but I was also still living there, still paying $3,000 a month into their household, still reading to Lily every night. And I told myself that it was complicated because family is complicated, and maybe I'd have a real conversation with Kevin about it when the time was right. I never got that conversation. What I got instead was a Tuesday night in February. Lily had gone to bed. Kevin and Diane had been having some kind of argument before I came downstairs for water. I could tell by the way they went quiet when they heard my footsteps. I got my water. I said goodnight, and Kevin said, "Actually, Dad, can we talk for a minute?" I sat down. What came next, he had clearly practiced. He said that he and Diane had been talking, and that the arrangement wasn't really working. He said they needed their space back. He said Diane had he paused here and looked at her, certain needs around the home environment that were hard to meet with another person living there. I said, "What does that mean, Kevin?" He didn't answer that. He just said that they thought it would be better for everyone if I found my own place. He said he'd help me look. He said maybe something nearby so I could still see Lily. I looked at Diane. She was looking at the table. Then I asked the thing I needed to ask. I said, "And the $40,000 I gave you in September?" Kevin said that was for the house, and it had gone to the house. I said I'd like it returned. Kevin said that wasn't really possible. Then Diane said, and this is the moment that changed everything, the one I will not forget. She said, "We didn't ask you to move in here. You asked us. You should have known there were costs involved." I sat with that for a moment. I really sat with it. Then I said, "Okay." I stood up. "I'll be out within the week." Kevin looked surprised. I think he expected me to argue, maybe cry, maybe beg. Instead, I went back upstairs, closed the door quietly, and called my attorney. "Here's what I want you to understand about the next 3 months. It was not revenge. I don't like that word. I was 63 years old, and I was done being treated like a liability in my own son's home. What I did was not about punishing anyone. It was about restoring the reality that had been quietly rewritten around me while I was grieving. My attorney is a woman I've known for 15 years. I called her at 9 o'clock that Tuesday night and told her what was happening. She told me to write down everything I could remember, dates, amounts, conversations, before I went to sleep. I did. 4 pages, handwritten, at the kitchen table while the rest of the house was quiet. I had already begun, quietly, over the previous 2 months, restructuring certain accounts. Not because I suspected this specifically, but because my financial advisor had recommended it after Evelyn died, getting everything organized, updated, titled correctly. So when I called my attorney, a significant portion of my assets were already properly arranged. I spent 3 days looking at properties. I found a house, a smaller house, 1 story, a good neighborhood, a yard that backed up to a creek. I paid for it in cash. I signed the papers on a Friday. On Sunday morning, when Kevin and Diane were at church with Lily, I packed everything I owned into a rented van. It took about 2 hours. I left a note on the kitchen table that said I would be in touch through my attorney. I did not leave my new address. I drove to my new house, unloaded what I needed, and sat on the back porch and watched the creek for a while. I felt something I hadn't felt in almost a year. I felt like myself. The letter arrived at Kevin's house 11 days later, sent by my attorney via certified mail with return receipt. It outlined a few things. First, the $40,000 I had given to Kevin in September had been provided under a specific set of representations, that it would be used for construction of an addition to the property, including accommodations for me. Those representations were not honored. The money had been used for other purposes without my knowledge or consent. The letter requested full repayment within 60 days. Second, I had been contributing $3,000 a month to household expenses for 9 months. A portion of this I was prepared to consider a gift, a portion I was not. The letter specified the amount I expected returned. Third, and this is the part I thought hardest about, I had updated my estate documents. Kevin was still my son. He was not, however, still my primary beneficiary. I had established trusts for Lily's education and welfare that Kevin and Diane could not access or direct. Everything else had been redistributed. My attorney told me I didn't have to include that third part in the letter. She said I could make those changes quietly and say nothing. I included it anyway, not out of cruelty. Because I believed Kevin deserved to understand the full consequences of what had happened, rather than find out after I was gone, when he couldn't ask me about it. Kevin called me the same day the letter arrived. I let it go to voicemail. He called 4 more times. I let those go too. He drove to my neighborhood. I know this because my neighbor mentioned a car sitting outside for a while on a Wednesday afternoon, but I had not given him my address. My attorney's address was on the letter. If he wanted to respond formally, he knew how. He didn't respond formally. He texted. Pages of texts from both him and Diane. Some angry. Some apologetic. Some that seemed to be both at once. I read every one of them. I didn't respond to any of them. Diane texted me separately on a Thursday evening. She said she wanted me to know that she had never meant for things to go this way. She said she had always respected me. She said that the night they asked me to leave, she had just been stressed, and her words came out wrong. I thought about Evelyn. I thought about the 9 weeks we had between diagnosis and the end. I thought about how she used to say that the people who show you who they are in hard moments, those are the moments you should believe. I did not respond to Diane. The 60-day window came and went. Kevin did not repay the $40,000. He did not repay the portion of the household contributions my attorney had specified. My attorney filed the appropriate paperwork. It's a civil matter now, moving through its process at the pace these things move. I'm not in a hurry. What I want to tell you about the months since, and this is the part that surprised me, is how quiet things got. Not lonely quiet, just quiet. I have a routine now. I wake up early, make coffee, sit on the back porch. The creek makes a sound in the morning that I have come to feel grateful for in a way that's hard to explain. I go to the farmer's market on Saturdays. I've started cooking properly again, the way I used to cook before Evelyn got sick, and we started doing everything easy. Lily's school held a grandparents' event in April. I went. Kevin was there. We nodded at each other across the gymnasium. Lily ran to me and held onto my hand for most of the morning, and I read to her twice during the quiet reading time. And when the event was over and Kevin was putting her coat on, she asked him if Grandpa could come have lunch with them. Kevin said maybe another time. Lily looked at me with that 7-year-old face that understands more than it should. I told her I'd see her soon. I'm working on that. Making sure I see her in ways that don't depend on Kevin and Diane's cooperation. My attorney has been helpful on that front too. A few people who knew about the situation asked me. Friends, my brother, my neighbor who is a very nosy but ultimately well-meaning man, They asked me if I was bitter, if I regretted, if I wished things had gone differently. I've thought about that question genuinely, and here's what I've come to. I don't regret leaving. Not for a moment. I should have left sooner, probably. I should have seen earlier what I was becoming in that house. A resource to be managed, not a father to be loved. That's not Kevin's character entirely. Kevin is not a bad person, but Kevin is married to someone who has a particular talent for slowly rewriting the terms of things, and Kevin has a particular weakness for not noticing until it's too late. I do grieve something. I grieve the version of this that could have existed, where I moved in during the hardest months, and they were generous, and I recovered slowly and found my footing, and then I moved out on my own terms and we all went to dinner on Sundays. That version was possible. I could have been that father-in-law. I wanted to be. But you can't give people a different character just by wanting it badly enough. I learned that from Evelyn, actually. She was wise about people in ways I am still learning to be. So, no. I'm not bitter. Bitter would mean I was still waiting for something. I'm not waiting for anything. I have a house by a creek. I have enough money to live well for the rest of my life, and some left over for a granddaughter who is going to need good options when she grows up. I have coffee on the back porch every morning. I have the farmer's market on Saturdays. I have my name on my own front door. For anyone out there who is sitting in a situation that feels like the one I was in, where you've told yourself it's complicated, where you've made yourself smaller to keep the peace, where you've given things that were never acknowledged and waited for a gratitude that never came, I just want to say this. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to take your life back. It is not cruel to stop funding your own mistreatment. It is not cold to protect what you built over a lifetime. And the quiet that comes after, the real, honest, accountable quiet, it's not loneliness. It's something else entirely. It took me a while to know the word for it. The word is peace. I've been sitting on the back porch a lot lately. The creek doesn't care what day it is. It just moves. I find that useful right now. People ask me if I feel guilty. A few of my brother's friends, people who heard pieces of the story secondhand, they want to know if I regret how hard I came down on Kevin. And I understand the question. He's my son. I raised him. I taught him how to shake a man's hand and look him in the eye. I thought I'd taught him other things too. Here's what I've come to understand about how life actually works. Not in any grand spiritual sense. Just in the plain observable way that cause leads to effect, the way water runs downhill. What Kevin and Diane built in that house was a kind of slow erosion. It wasn't one dramatic betrayal. It was $40,000 redirected to a patio. It was a dinner made for 3 when 4 people lived there. It was Diane's voice saying, "We didn't ask you to move in here," like she'd been saving that sentence for exactly the right moment to use it as a weapon. Each of those things was a choice. Small choices that accumulated into something that couldn't be undone by a phone call or a text message. And my choices accumulated too. Every month I stayed silent was a choice. Every time I told myself it was complicated, that was a choice. I kept choosing to absorb the cost of their comfort, because I thought that's what fathers do. What I know now is that there's a difference between generosity and erosion. Generosity comes from strength. What I was doing came from grief and from not wanting to see clearly what was right in front of me. The morning I drove away from that house, I felt something shift. Not joy exactly, more like the return of something I hadn't noticed was missing. A kind of basic self-respect that had been quietly leaking out of me for 9 months. Evelyn would have recognized it. She always knew before I did when I was shrinking myself to fit a situation that didn't deserve that much of me. The hardest part isn't Kevin. The hardest part is Lily. She's 7, and she didn't choose any of this, and she's the one who asked why Grandpa doesn't come to dinner anymore. That question costs me something every time I think about it. But I've learned that protecting a child doesn't always mean keeping the peace between the adults around her. Sometimes it means making sure there's at least one adult in her life who lives with integrity, who shows her by example what it looks like to know your own worth. That's the thing about character. yours and other people's. You can't negotiate someone into having it. You can't pay for it. You can't wait long enough for it to arrive if it was never really there. What you can do is decide at any point to stop pretending the situation is something it isn't. That decision is always available. It was available to me on day one, and I waited 9 months to make it. I'm not waiting on anything now. The creek moves. The coffee's hot. Lily's birthday is next month, and I already know what I'm getting her. That's enough. That's genuinely, quietly enough.